Hey class. So in this video, we're going to go over compositing images in Photoshop. We're still sort of at the beginning of learning Photoshop, so I'll talk about some of the basics and some stuff that I'm doing that you may not be familiar with. And basically what we want to do is just take two images and layer them together in a way that kind of looks like they're the same image. And we're going to do a pretty specific technique to do this. It's called masking in Photoshop. It's a really useful thing to be able to do if you're editing images and doing other stuff. So we're going to learn how to do that. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of steps. So I'll try to be succinct. But we're also going to cover sourcing images. So we're going to talk a lot about where to find images and when it's appropriate to use an image for your project. And so we'll start there. We'll get a couple images. Then we'll bring them over into Photoshop. And then we'll composite them together. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to make myself a little smaller. I'm recording from my office today, so the sound is maybe not as good because it's a little bit louder here, but I think it should be fine. Yeah, hopefully it'll be good. Okay, I'm going to make myself smaller, and we're going to get started. So I'm just going to get started from Brightspace just to kind of situate ourselves in Brightspace. I'm going to open up MMP 100. And I actually don't really need to do anything here right now. In the second video, I'll kind of review submitting the blog post for this week, but I'm not going to do that now. Excuse me, I'm going to go to OpenLab, and we're going to go to our image page because we're still working in our image topic. You can see I've added a few videos here. So this is from our week 1 lesson on digital imaging and our intro to Photoshop and a video on submitting to OpenLab. So, if you need to review any of those, they're there. Today, we're also going to take a minute and talk about Creative Commons licenses. And then we're going to use the Creative Commons search engine to find a couple images to composite together. So we're not going to be in Photoshop quite yet. So let's take a look at Creative Commons licenses. So Creative Commons is an organization that kind of provides a set of standard licenses that creators can use to apply to their work that sort of determines how other people can use it. And so it's a really useful thing to be familiar with if you are either creating media that you want other people to remix and share and use in their own projects, or if you are using media that other people have created. And so people create media that they want other people to use for a lot of different reasons. And we'll probably get a sense of some of those as we start to look at some of these images. But yeah, we're just going to take a look at these. So one thing to notice with Creative Commons licenses is that there are different rules that they apply. So some of the Creative Commons licenses are less restrictive or more permissive. And some are more restrictive or less permissive. So restrictive just means there's fewer scenarios in which we can use the content. Permissive means there's more scenarios. So the most, like the CC0 license is going to be the most permissive. You can do whatever you want with this content. But most licenses will have some of these other attributes. So CC BY stands for attribution. So it's like a byline, like this image is by so-and-so. And so that means that we have to give credit to the creator. And we'll talk about how to do that when we submit our final project for this image section next week. There's also, what does SA stand for? Adaptions, okay. So SA means that if you make something with the content, you have to use the same license when you share it. So that's a little bit different. You have to give credit, but you also have to say, I'm applying the same license to this project. Non-commercial means that you cannot use the content for commercial projects. So you can't make, a commercial product. You can't make like a T-shirt that you're going to sell or something like that. And then this is just all three of them together, and no derivatives. So no derivatives just means you can't just use the thing as the thing. You have to make some kind of change to it. Let's see. And so yeah, here's the CC0. This is the public domain license. This just means you can do whatever you want with it. And so we're not going to be licensing our projects. We're just going to be using materials. So we'll look at the licenses that other people use. But this is a good place to kind of get started understanding that stuff. And they have a search engine. This is a good place to start because it shows you a lot of different websites where you can find a lot of Creative Commons materials. So Google Images is a good one you've probably used before. Wikipedia Commons has a lot of media. We'll probably find some stuff on there. Open Game Art has a lot of stuff that people create for to use in video games. There's a lot of stuff on here that's really useful. 3D models, Vimeo videos, 3D models in Sketchfab, all sorts of stuff. I'm going to go to Google Images just because that's kind of the easiest one to use, and sometimes it'll actually point us to other places. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an image of New York City, and I'm going to composite like a animal on there that's not typically something we see in New York. So I'm going to do a lizard for this project. So I'm going to look up New York City first, and it's going to open up Google. And you'll notice that this looks a little bit different than maybe when you've done a Google search before. It has this tools bar open. And in the tools bar, there's this thing called usage rights. And in here, this is actually, it doesn't show it here because it's in the search command up here. But if you came to Google just naturally, not through the Creative Commons website, you could select Creative Commons licenses here. And so you'll notice that the images that it shows you are different than what you might see otherwise. And you're going to see a lot of Flickr, a lot of Wikipedia or Wikimedia. You're going to see Pexels is another website that has a lot of free Creative Commons works. Pix for free. So you can see there's a lot of stuff on here from these specific websites that use Creative Commons and public domain licensing. I have a specific image that I want to work with, so I'm just going to add pigeon in here because that's going to bring me right here. And so this is a Wikipedia image. And so that's a good example of somewhere where somebody might want to use a Creative Commons image. And you can see here, I'm blocking it a little bit, but let me scroll up a little bit. So you can see here, it knows the copyright, so it's share alike unported. So that's a little restrictive, but since we're doing classwork and we're not going to probably share this outside of the class, then we don't really worry about that. And then it has the creator name, which we need to save in order to use this later. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the image. That's going to take me over to this Wikipedia page on birding in New York City. And it has this image here, which I can look at, and it'll show me where it came from. So it was created by an author named 01, and it has it has actually a Creative Commons share alike generic license. So we're free to share, remix, we have to give attribution, and we have to apply the same license to anything that we distribute with this image. So that's fine for me. I'm happy to add this license to my class demo, which is what this is going to be. And some of the rules don't, always apply if you're just making student work. It kind of depends on how you publish stuff and other things like that. But anyway, we want to save this information, so I'm just going to leave this tab here, and I'll include it in my blog post later, so that I'll, be able to save it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to download a copy of this image. And the nice thing about Wikipedia, and most of the websites do this as well, is it actually gives you options for different sizes. So the highest resolution, like the most pixels, is this 1800 by 1800. You can see one of them is 1024 by 1024. That's a good size to start with. That's what we used last week for our other project. So I'm just going to use that. So when I click on that, it opens the image in another window. And if I right click on here, I can save the image. I can also hit Control S on the keyboard in Windows or Command S in Mac. And I've got my image folder is already open, so it's there already. But if you don't have it open, just make sure that you're putting it. I have my MMP 100 folder in my Spring 2025 folder. So I go to MMP 100 and go to Image. You can see the project I made last week here. And I'm just going to save this image. So I'm just going to click Save. And so now that is on my computer. So let's take a look at that in the file system. So I'm just going to go to where I have this in my MMP 100 folder in the image folder. Okay, so you can see that image there. If we open the details tab, we can see some information. It's 320 kilobytes. It's a JPEG, so we know how to work with that. Oh, I might be blocking that. Let me make this, put this over here. Okay, so you can see that info there in the details panel. Okay, so let's get another image. So I'm gonna go back to my Google search, and this time I'm gonna search for lizard, and I'm gonna get a lizard to composite into this scene. And I have a specific lizard that I want to use. Usually it's right up at the top of the results, but I don't see it. Let's see. Scroll down a little bit. I guess this image that I use a lot is not as popular as it used to be. That's kind of a good one. I could put that one in. Let's see if I can find my favorite. I think it's from Wikipedia, so maybe if I don't see it, I'll put Wikipedia in there. My favorite lizard. That looks similar, but that's not. Let's put Wikipedia. I was, of course, just using this, but now I'm in a demo. Let's see, lizard. There we go. Okay. This is a lizard I like to use, and I like to use this for a couple of reasons. You'll see when we get it into Photoshop. What we're going to do with this lizard, the background of the New York City with the pigeon, we're not really going to change that at all. The lizard image we're going to change more. So the reason I like to use this is because there's a lot of details, and the details are actually very similar to the rock details. And so this is actually not an ideal image to use for compositing. It's a lot easier to get to take the part of the image out when there's a lot of contrast. So maybe an image like, let's see if I can find a good example. Like something like this. This would be really easy. Basically what we're going to do in this project is we're going to take the lizard out of its image and put it into the other image. Something like this would be really easy because it's really just a lizard with a black background. So it's very easy for the computer, for Photoshop to figure that out. For this image, Photoshop is going to have a harder time finding what's the difference between the rock and the lizard. And when that happens, there's easy ways to fix it. So that's why I want to use this image. Anyway, I'm going to grab a copy of this image. I don't need like a huge version of it, so I'm going to take this slightly smaller version because I'm going to shrink it and put it next to this pigeon on this ledge here. So I'm going to hit Control S or Command S on Mac, and I'm going to save this image in the same folder. And now we can get started in Photoshop. So I'm going to close my browser for a moment. And so when I'm starting with an image, I can actually just open the image directly in Photoshop. So I don't have to import the image into Photoshop after opening it, and it'll just take on the properties of the image, like the width and height. So we'll see how that works. So if I want to open this in Photoshop, I can right click, and it's going to show me some options down here. None of these are the options I want, but if I go to Open With, you might see Adobe Photoshop there. If you don't see it there, you can go to Show More Options, and you can go to, let's see, where is it? Oh, I think you would go to Open With, and then you can choose. So if you don't see Photoshop here, you can go to Choose Another App, and then you can find Photoshop from there. If that doesn't work, just open Photoshop and drag the image on there. That's fine as well. I'm going to open it with Photoshop, and that's going to take a second to start up. I should have had Photoshop open already. I'll just pause until it's... Okay, I've got Photoshop open, and you can see it's got the image here, and it's actually got the image on this background layer, and it's locked. I don't know that I'm actually going to edit this at all, so I'll just leave that for now. But if we go to the Image tab and go to Canvas Size, you can see it's 1024 by 1024. So it takes on the size of the image that we imported. So I'm going to hit OK here, and now we're going to put our lizard image on top. So to do that, you can drag and drop. If you want to just open up the File Explorer or the Finder and just drag the lizard on like there, it'll do that fine. You have to hit Enter, and it'll be on there. But you can also choose how you want to add it. So I'm going to delete this for a second. If you want to embed the image, that means it copies all the image data, which means that the Photoshop document, you can send it around and you don't need to include the images. That's probably the best way to do it for now. You can go to File and Place Embedded. And so if I do this, what it does is it actually, as I said, copies all the data from this image and includes it in the Photoshop document. There's another option here, which is Place Linked. That puts a link to the file. So then if you send the Photoshop document, you also have to send the file. This is good if you have really big files and you don't want to make copies of those files inside the Photoshop document. But our files are not that big, so it's going to be a little bit easier just to do Place Embedded. So I'm going to put that lizard in there and place it. And again, it has the transform open. I'm going to go over that in a moment. But when you first add it in there, you're not going to be able to do other stuff until you just hit enter. And that's going to save the transform at the current size. All right, so what we want to do is get the lizard out of the background of this image. And so we can resize the image, we can change it, but we need to take out the background. So if I go to Edit and go to Transform, you'll see that these little squares come back, and I can resize the image, so I can kind of move him over here. I'm not going to do that quite yet before, because I want to do the mask first. So I'm going to keep him a little bit big. I can move him around, I can rotate him, but I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to create the mask. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Most of those options are under these two tools right here. If I hold down on this, you can see there's a bunch of different tools. There's a selection brush tool where we can paint over where we want the selection. This is kind of hard to do, so we're not going to do that. There's also a lasso tool where you can kind of draw a selection. We're not going to use those because they're a little bit tricky. Under here, there's some sort of assisted selection thing. So this object selection tool just kind of does it for you. And it's not always perfect, but it's probably the best place to start, and we can edit it. So that's what we're going to do. You can also do a quick selection tool. It's a little bit like the paintbrush, but it kind of helps you. It kind of adds to the selection as you paint. And then the magic wand tool is kind of the same as the object selection tool, but it's a little bit of an older version of that. So we're going to use the object selection tool, and you can see it's already it's pretty good actually. Sometimes it takes a little while, but it's already found out where the lizard is. But you can see there's some gaps there. So if I zoom in a little bit, you can see it's missing like the arm right here. You can see it's kind of missing some of the toes. And so that's why I picked this image, is because I want to show that Photoshop will help us a lot, but it's not going to be perfect. So we might need to edit the mask. If you want to, practice, use a difficult image. If you just want to be able to do it and have it be pretty easy, then I would use an image with a lot less detail. Anyway, if I like this, I'm just going to click, and it's going to make what's called the marching ants. If we zoom in, you can see these little dots kind of moving around. That's called the marching ants. That is how Photoshop shows us what part of the image is selected. And when you have a selection, you can do a lot of different stuff with it. You can copy and paste. You can change parts of just that selection. What we're going to use it for, if I move the mouse, you can see the marching ants are still there. Because we still need to edit, because it's not perfect, I can't just copy and paste this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mask. So if you hover over this little button down here at the bottom, and I'm going to go over this a couple times because this is the part that people often skip and come to me and say, I don't know how to do it. It's because this button, for whatever reason, it's very small. You can also go to Layer, and you can go to Layer Mask and, reveal or hide there. But the easy thing to do is just click this little button that has like a little square with a little circle in the middle down here, and it's gonna add this mask. So it masks out the background. And you can see this tiny little thumbnail image here that looks like a lizard. The black parts are the parts that Photoshop is not showing, and then the white parts are just the parts that it shows. So that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go back to the Move tool. I'm gonna zoom out by hitting Control minus. And that looks pretty good. We're going to put our lizard over here. We can still resize the lizard. That's another thing that's nice about the mask, is it updates with the layer. But we need to, fix a couple of parts of the lizard that are not quite perfect. So Let's turn off the background for a second, actually, so we can see this more easily, and we'll zoom in. So we're missing some details here and some other parts. So we can edit the mask. And so if you have issues with the mask, we need to edit it. If you don't, you can skip this part. But let's edit the mask. So what we do is we click on the mask, or double click on the mask. And that brings us into this mask edit window. You may see a dialog box that says like enter the mask. If it's the first time you're doing it, just say enter the mask. You also might see something that just looks like this with the onion skin, and you can see it's kind of like, you can kind of see where the mask is. The easier view is this red overlay. So just go ahead and choose the red overlay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw in parts of the mask. And then we'll do a couple other little changes as well. I'm going to hide myself for a second because I'm going to be blocking some of those changes. Okay, so in this mask view, we have a few options. You can select parts, you can refine edge. What I'm going to use is the brush tool. So that's the third tool right here. You can hit Control plus and minus to zoom in or out, and then you can hold spacebar to move around the image. And what I want to do is just draw back in the parts of the image that I want. So you can see when I draw over this, it adds more, it takes away that red. The red represents the mask. So I'm just drawing over the parts that I want to bring back in. So anything that's red that I don't want to be red. And we can turn down the opacity also if it's kind of hard to see, or turn it up. So I think this is part of the hand here. Kind of hard to tell from this angle. We can always fix this. And if you see, so if you go too far, like I think, some of this is obviously the background, you can hold Alt, or you can click on the minus button here. And when you do that, you'll add more red back in. So you'll subtract from the mask. So we just want to fix this up. And so now I'm just going to go around the image and try to find parts that need to be added in. Okay. For some reason it's freaking out on me a little bit. I'll just hit Control Z to undo. Okay. And I'll take out this red part here. Okay. And in the old days, when we were touching stuff up, you could spend hours fixing an image like this, but these days it's much easier to do. This is actually pretty good all around. I think there's some missing toes down here that we can fill in. For some reason, Photoshop is kind of freaking out right now. I think between the video recording and the application, my computer is kind of slowing down a little bit, but that's okay. I'm gonna just draw this toe in. There's another toe here. See, how far does this actually go down? Okay. Then I'm gonna hold Alt or Option to paint that back in. And I could spend a lot of time doing this. I'm gonna just kind of, keep it pretty simple. Okay, for some reason it's getting stuck over in the opacity area. Undo that. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit and see how that looks. It looks pretty good. Although actually I think there's a lot of extra. Oh, I think I accidentally undid this part. Sometimes you can do Control Z too many times. Okay, so I'm gonna put that back in. Okay, so a couple other things that I think will be helpful. You can see at the edges of the where the mask starts, sometimes it goes over a little bit, and this kind of like little bit of the background comes through, and it ends up making this kind of weird edge that we don't want. So there's a couple ways that I can fix that. One is using a shift edge. If I shift negative, the edge is going to move in. If I shift positive, it's going to move out. It's very hard to see. You can barely see it, but if I go all the way in, see how that edge disappears? Let me zoom in a little bit. You don't want to go too crazy with this because, oh yeah, I keep getting stuck in these boxes. Okay. So hopefully you can see that. I'm just shifting the edge towards the inside. And again, we don't want to go crazy because sometimes it'll go too far. So I think shift edge -50 is good. And then we can add just a tiny little bit of feathering. This adds like a little bit of fading. You can see if I do a lot, it just is gonna mask out the whole thing. But if I just do a little tiny bit, it just kind of softens that edge a little bit. So maybe 0.3, 0.4. I'll hit OK. And now my mask looks pretty good. Let's bring the background back in. And let's move this guy over here. So we're gonna do some transforms to make this guy a little bit smaller, so he can fit here. I don't remember, did he have another arm? No, there's no arm over there. Okay. All right, so now we've got our lizard and our pigeon together. And I could rotate him a little bit, but I don't think I need to. I think he's pretty good. Let's put him right on the edge though. Okay, so now we've got our two buddies, our lizard and our pigeon hanging out. Oh, whoops, I haven't saved this yet. So I should have saved this earlier, but we'll go over that now. You do see when I bring them over the edge, we see that little line right there. So I'm not gonna, I would have to kind of refine the mask even more. I could go back into the mask and I could shift the edge more. At a certain point though, it starts to look a little weird. So I'll just shift it a little bit more and then feather it a little bit. Okay. I don't think this is gonna look good. Yeah, see, that's when you go too far, then you get this weird glow. I don't want that. So I'm gonna hit Control Z and undo. And I'll refine this later. It doesn't have to be perfect. We got a pretty good example, and we're gonna add some stuff in the second video for this week that will make them look like they're in the same image a little bit more. That's it for this video. In the second video, let me save this. I keep hitting Control S. I should have saved this a long time ago. Let me bring back my video. I should have saved this when I started, but I forgot to. Let's go ahead and save it now. So I'm gonna go back here and hit Control S or Command S on Mac. And we don't want to use this whole long image for our title, so we'll just call this composite.psd. And we're going to keep working with this in the next video, but we've covered compositing. What we're going to do in the next video is talk about adding some adjustments. We can change the colors and the lighting and add some filters. And what that'll do is, right now, if we look at this image, it's pretty clear that the background and the lizard were taken by different cameras at different time with different lighting conditions. And to make it look a little bit more cohesive, we can do some different things. But we're going to cover that in the next video, so I'm going to stop here, and I'll see you in the next video.